Hi, I'm Senator Lisa Murkowski, and welcome to the Alaska Report. In recognition of the 50th anniversary of Alaska statehood this year, I've asked the Library of Congress to search its extensive archives and collections for important documents, maps, photographs, books, and other memorabilia pertaining to our great state of Alaska. They've come up with a treasure trove of materials that I'm going to share with you today. I'm honored today to have as my guest the Librarian of Congress, Dr. James Billington, who will talk about some of the Alaska historical documents and give us his insight into this remarkable national treasure where we're taping this edition of the Alaska Report. Dr. Billington was sworn in as the Librarian of Congress on September 14, 1987. He is the 13th person to hold the position since the library was established in 1800. Dr. Billington is a historian by training who is taught at both Harvard and Princeton universities, and he is a former director of the distinguished Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. As librarian, he oversees the largest library in the world with nearly 142 million items on approximately 950 miles of bookshelves. One other interesting fact, the library receives some 22,000 items each working day and adds approximately 10,000 items to the collections daily. Truly a remarkable institution and repository of knowledge. Welcome, Dr. Billington. I'm delighted to have you on the show, but even more so to be able to showcase the Alaska Report here at the Library of Congress. I say to our visitors when they come to Washington, D.C. from the state, that this building is by far the most magnificent of the treasures that we have here, and you as the Librarian of Congress are charged with just a remarkable treasure trove here. So delighted to be with you today and to talk about some of the treasures here we have at the Library of Congress.
Well, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here, and to note, of course, first of all, that the Congress of the United States for 209 years has been the greatest single patron of a library in the history of the world. This is the Library of Congress. We serve the Congress by accumulating more of the world's knowledge in some 470 languages than any other place in the world, and also have the closest thing to a mint record of American private sector creativity, thanks to housing the copyright deposit of the United States and amassing great collections that tell some of the stories, much the stories you'll find in any one place, of the life and record of our knowledge-based democracy and our creative people, all in their great variety and ever ingenious way of opening things up. And nothing has been more exciting in opening up in the history of our nation than Alaska, the acquisition of it, the development of it, and its coming as a statehood, and then the record of distinctive creativity that you have up there.
Well, and you have been involved with your focus on Russia and Russian histories and Russian studies, and have, I don't know whether it's taken a particular interest in Alaska and its historical perspective on the globe, but I know we've had conversations about your ties to how Alaska, when it was first purchased from Russia, and some of the history there that we see.
Well, it is, and one of the big frontiers of knowledge, really, in the generation and communication of knowledge and creativity now is, of course, the great digital revolution. That has great implications and possibilities for Alaska, because even remote regions can reach through the internet, through the magic of electronic communication. And the first step, one of the first steps we've taken in moving from just putting online we've got about 15,300,000 primary documents of American history and culture online. But then we decided to try and do it internationally. And we began with a project called Meeting of the Frontiers, which was really Alaska-based. That's where the frontiers, the eastern and western frontiers of European civilization, where the great Russian movement east and the great American movement west and then north met just right across the Bering Straits. And so the original organizing of this took place in Fairbanks, Alaska. And the Rasmussen Library there has been one of the contributors to. We now have about 750,000 items online comparing the American frontier with the Russian frontier and the meeting of those frontiers in Alaska itself. So the whole digital, we now have a world digital library with something online from all 192 countries that are members of UNESCO. It's a UNESCO project, but it all began with a bilingual, binational project that was rooted very much in Alaska, and with which we've had wonderful relations with Alaskan institutions.
Well, you mentioned the digitization of the Library of Congress. When we come in and we can actually see and touch the volumes that are here, that's wonderful and that's impressive. But coming from Alaska to Washington, D.C. is a long trip, but you can be part of the collections through the internet, and it is an amazing thing.
Absolutely, and we're working increasingly with teachers in Alaska for teaching of history through primary documents. It makes it exciting. I actually have a couple here that I might
Good. We'd
show
like
your
to take a
viewers
peek at them.
that
Show
are
us
interesting,
some of the things that you
because
have.
not only was this the opening of a new frontier really for America, but also it was a lot of founding expeditions up there from what you call the lower 48, discovering not just the beauty of Alaska and its natural resources and its wonderful native peoples, but also from a scientific point of view. For instance, this is the Harriman expedition of 1899. Harriman was a great railroad baron, and he wanted to go up there, and he came up by ship. And you see, for instance, here, this is the notebook. This is a wonderful source, and we have some wonderful ones from Alaska. A notebook of the whole trip. This is their map.
So this was the actual diary from the
This
journal
is the actual
itself.
diary, and you see it was Curtis, the famous person who depicted Native Americans and was on this trip. Muir, the great figure. Right. This was a scientific expedition. Here's young Averill Harriman, who later, of course, became a very important figure in our own times. He was 3 years old here. So it mixes kind of family things.
It's really like a scrapbook.
It is very much. And they celebrated the 4th of July on Kodiak Island. So you see the American flag here, and a poem that was written for the occasion. So you have poem, you have scientific materials, and you have at the same time a sort of patriotic sense that this is America now, moving forward with this newly acquired wonderful land that was also a place, a kind of open air place for scientific and naturalistic and ethnographic discovery.
Well, and recognizing that they just did the recreation of the Harriman expedition several years back, and it was in the news. It was really quite interesting to follow the expedition or the recreation of that expedition. But this diary would have been fun to
and
review
here's
at the
a
same
second
time.
one that was lesser known. This is Billy Mitchell.
Oh yeah, we all know Billy Mitchell.
He's on the ground here, not yet
Not
up
flying.
in the air.
Okay.
He's helping lay the first telegraphic internal communication and telegraphic communication that goes beyond. Here are some pictures of him. In the background you can see the Yukon River. He's
an eagle.
He's laying the groundwork. And here's an even better picture. He's actually not sailing, but rowing down the Yukon. And in a boat that was hewn out of the lumber that they found there and was going to be dismembered at the other end of the line for packing boxes for all the gold they were going to discover. But this is the business of the internal discovery of Alaska, which of course reached its climax in the gold rush, and the discovery of that which lay even beyond the traditional bounds of the Pacific and got up into here is Billy Mitchell then sketched the first plan for a airline route this is before he was active in his more famous career later, but from New York to Nome, a direct flight. I don't think there's ever been one, and I'm not sure he never made the flight, but he charted it for us. So these are the frontiers, these are the opening of the imagination of Americans by setting up telegraphy and then projecting how the planes are going to fly. This is all turn of the century stuff in the early 1903. And here,
Amazing photographs.
and of course, the Klondike Gold Rush is legendary, not just in Alaska, but everywhere. And here is but just before movies, you had moving pictures of it all. You had this wonderful stereopticon that created the illusion of three-dimensional pictures. This is the actual picture that Charlie Chaplin saw in the home of Douglas Fairbanks Sr. that inspired him to do his famous 1923 movie, The Gold Rush. And we've not only have that restored and preserved, but we've also recaptured the music that accompanied it. It was a silent film, but silent films in those days had music. But this, you can see, is already a very dramatic photograph, and you can see
Can I look at that? Can I look through it?
the stereopticon, that creates the illusion. It's two pictures. And if you look through that, you will get a sense of the drama, the human drama, the dimensions of the gold rush itself, which of course is very familiar to Alaskans. But this made it familiar to the world as a kind of world phenomenon. And these dual pictures were a way of dramatizing things for the future. And
that was, when was this? 1920, early 20s?
no, this was much earlier.
Was
this
it?
is this is in the just the beginning of the turn of the century. All this is turn of the century material. When the gold rush was not only a fact of life, but it was also a figment of the imagination for the future of film. And you can see these pictures are quite dramatic in the sense of human participation. There's a stream of people coming down. And as I say, we tend to be the repository of the original of these things, and more of this, including the things I've been showing you, are in fact online or going online.
Well,
so
this particular picture with the scene going up the golden staircase is one that is so well known, not only in Alaska but outside. Our license plate in the state actually has the Klondike Trail and going through the Chilkoot Pass there with the miners going up. So this is a very famous. In fact, I celebrated my 50th birthday by hiking the Chilkoot Trail.
oh my goodness.
So
marvelous.
you know, part of Alaskan history there. But
So these are just some of the wonderful resources on Alaska that you can find in this enormous collection of what we call American memory that's preserved here in the Library of Congress.
But you have other things.
Yes,
Well, can we see them now? Can we go take a look at them?
we'd be delighted.
Well, let's go.
This is the 1802 map when Alaska was still part of Russia. You can see the details pretty good. You can see the extension of the sort of Russian settlements all the way down close to, well, there's the Columbia River and Oregon. So
you've got
that frontier that we were talking about was moving down and almost meeting the Spanish part of the Pacific settlement. So this really was a meeting of frontiers.
But it's interesting, you look at the developments there, you go up the coast and it's like there is no more Alaska. There's nothing above the Seward Peninsula there.
That's right, that's right. And what you see here, of course, is in the 18th century, the American map showed this as unknown territory, and Russians showed this as unknown territory over here. But now you can see that they're all represented as a pretty coherent and fairly accurate version. This was acquired in 1921, so it's well during the Russian period. But then over here, we have the first map after the sale to America. This is ceded by Russia to the United States. This is a fairly clear delineation of what those borders are. This is the first really, and by the way, both these two maps and others are online. You can get them in the remotest part.
So if you go to the Library of Congress website. Okay.
LOC.gov. It's very simple. It's all free. And there's, as I say, there's 250,000 items in this Meeting of the Frontiers section, and money that is going on to the World Digital Library. So Alaska gets advertisement in remote places elsewhere, but also it's available online free of charge. And it's being increasingly used as primary documents. You study from them. There's no subsequent overlay. You actually see what people saw at those times before and after the purchase of Alaska. And here, we just happen to have these are Sanborn fire insurance maps that show the detailed picture of what was built this happens to be a place called Ketchikan.
Ketchikan, Alaska, that was where I was born.
So,
well, so this was back when? What's the date? 1914, is that right?
Yeah,
1914.
John Hebert, our curator of maps.
The public school where my grandmother taught. And my other grandmother lived up at the top of that hill. There's the cold storage where my uncles worked when they were kids.
You know, you can trace the genealogy of where you lived from the Sanborn fire insurance map because they document pretty clearly the size and, in some cases, the fire dangers of the houses.
And there's actually 5 sheets to this particular map, so it covers all of a long stretch of Ketchikan.
Yeah, and Ketchikan is a long stretch, still is, all these years later, but this is fascinating looking at.
People like the genealogy of where they lived as much as they like the genealogy of their families. And of course in Alaska, which is the pioneering state. Now here we are on Broadway, the heart of the Klondike. This is the first big find. This is a play on Broadway.
So is this like a playbill that would be posted?
Yeah, this is a playbill on Broadway. This was actually the play, The Heart of the Klondike. And as
that must be Klondike Kate there.
Well, she's holding a pretty big nugget of gold, and this fellow's still looking for it. Maybe the women were out there finding things that the men were still looking for. You can read it any way you want, but people love these posters that show you how not only what was happening in Alaska, but how it was being perceived and dramatized elsewhere. And of course, here is the original drawings of St. Michael's Cathedral before the fire.
This is in Sitka.
Historic American Building Survey. This is all online too. And back here, over here, is a photograph from the same period before the fire.
So would this book be just the architectural drawings of St. Michael's Cathedral, or is it other architectural drawings from this?
Oh yeah, well there's a whole book here, and Flood can tell you, who's in charge of all this, can turn the pages and show you all the detailed plans. And so after the fire, it was possible to reconstruct it on the basis of these original drawings, but Catherine Flood can tell you more about it.
And you're right, throughout the United States, the Historic American Building Survey was documenting old buildings, important structures, America's built environment in Alaska and all around the United States.
About 38,000 of these drawings, so it's an immense collection. But this is unique because, of course, it's a Russian Orthodox cathedral. We also have the archives of the Russian Orthodox Church in Alaska, which includes the private papers of saints, Russian saints. And all this was put on exhibit with the first summit when Yeltsin came over.
So, for instance, I was just out in the Pribilofs. I was on St. Paul, and they have just finished the reconstruction of their Russian Orthodox Church out there. So would they have had access to similar records so that they could make sure that they were following the original design?
Most likely, this entire collection is online, so it's very easy to look from home.
Great. What an incredible resource. This is fascinating.
So this is, you can see it, and these things are helpful because of all the drawings. If something happens to these historic buildings, they can be reconstructed just the way they were built. And here we're into folklore. So Mr. Taft can explain the American Folklife Center, 4 million items of American folklore, some Alaskan material.
And this relates very much to the St. Michael Cathedral because these 2 cassettes were recorded by Tlingit members of the church, of the choir, actually of several choirs in the area, and this really relates to 2 parts of Alaskan history, the native part of the history and the Russian part of the history. These are Tlingit Indians who are part of the Orthodox Church, singing, in this case chanting, a part of the creed.
In Tlingit?
In Tlingit.
In Tlingit, yeah. So it was not just in Old Slavic, as it would be in Russian, but...
They also sang in Slavonic, although I don't think they understood it.
So did they mix the 2, or...?
In some cases, they mixed the 2, and they mixed English and Tlingit. And I have a little clip here if you want to hear a bit.
Yeah.
Let's hope this one...
the Tlingit sounds, but it's definitely the Orthodox chant.
It is the Orthodox chant.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. It's great.
The first contact between the lower 48 and Alaska actually occurred on Captain Cook's third voyage, when a very stern Puritan fellow from Connecticut met the natives. He thought he was going to be cannibalized, and particularly when they began this service and the native language. But then he realized, why, this is a Christian worship service where he expected to be, wild natives and so forth. In fact, when we had this big exhibit for the first Yeltsin-Clinton summit, they assembled extraordinary amount of material showing that the monks from the old Russian Orthodox Church, who really ran Alaska in many ways that way, had recorded a lot of Aleutian language that no longer existed. And the curator discovered there was actually, it helped prove the connection across the Bering Straits going down all the way into Mayan, that there were some similarities.
Because of the language
The language, these lost languages had been recorded. So we have all that archive here, and much of that is also online and available for study. Now, this is a letter from Teddy Roosevelt advising Elihu Root to hang tough with the Canadians over the definition of the Canadian-Alaskan border from 1903. Dawn Van E of our manuscript section can tell you more about it. Elihu Root, later won the Nobel Prize for Peace. He was an important figure in his time, but Roosevelt was telling him to hang tough even with our Canadian friends. So this is typical of the presidential papers that we have in the manuscript section, with which Mr. Van E has been active for so long. It gets all media, historical things, whether it's pictures, whether it's music, whether it's letters and manuscripts or diaries. This gives you some idea of the variety.
If somebody has something in their private collection that they feel is of historical importance, how would they know whether it's something that should become part of the archives here?
I think just get in touch with us. Write a letter to, you can either write a letter just to the Library of Congress or to the thing like the American Folklife Center, which is a unique collection of the national legacy. It was only founded in 1976, so it's relatively new. But for instance, we have 10,000 wax cylinders of the American Indian, which we now have a machine that can take many photographs of it, and we'll be able to reconstruct that which is basically, more than anywhere else in the world, the history, the literature, and the music all in one of a great oral culture. And that will affect, of course, also the great Native American legacy that you have in Alaska for the Native peoples. Anyhow, so we should go on. This is unanimously, Congress created the Veterans History Project. And Colonel Bob Patrick, who's in charge of it, has already made it the largest oral history project in American history. This, by the way, is another in the Folklife. This is in the American Folklife Center, but Colonel Patrick, who was responsible for a lot of the World War II memorial, has given great dynamism to this. And this is a recording of, actually, an oral recording of a veteran of the original gold rush, Mr. Carter. So those kind of memoirs, which are whether they're in letters, diaries, or oral histories, are an important part of the record, as Mr. Taft can tell you. But here...
There's a letter here from Delegate Bartlett in 1946.
Yep. So all of these different forms. Now, the Oral History Project of Veterans History has really been remarkable, and Colonel Patrick can explain it to you. I myself did some interviews in Alaska. I interviewed one of the founder of the WACS, the Women's Auxiliary Corps in the war.
Mrs. Rasmussen?
Mrs. Rasmussen, great lady.
She is a phenomenal lady, a great Alaskan pioneer. Are you still collecting the stories from our veterans for this Veterans History Project?
Absolutely. We are always looking for people to interview the veteran in their life. We have schools involved in it, historical societies. The VA is heavily involved. Many congressional offices, as you know, are collecting and helping us in those efforts. And just families and friends of veterans taking our materials, sitting down with a tape recorder or audiovisual camera, and doing an interview. We also take in things like this, like letters, diaries, original photographs, those type of materials. So we have some 65,000 collections, and we're always looking for more.
Well, we've got some Eskimo scouts that served our nation honorably, and we're still working to make sure that they get their just compensation as veterans. And I know we're trying to make sure that their story is told very clearly, because they played a very unique role guarding the homeland here.
Well, we'll get in touch with your office
Absolutely.
and make sure we get that. And by the way, speaking directly to veterans in Alaska, the experience of Alaska in the war is really very interesting and important, of course. And so people who have memories or have materials of any kind, generally speaking, veterans often underestimate the importance for history of the human side of things. And that's exactly what this archive, the biggest so far we have in American history of oral testimony. I don't think as a historian the history of wars are ever going to be written the same again, because now you can see what it was like from all kinds of different perspectives and all kinds of different areas, because the Pacific Theater across Alaska played a special importance. So please, we appreciate all your office has done and all we've received already, but if there are any veterans listening,
Well, that's a great invitation.
we really
appreciate
want
that.
them to get in touch either directly, through congressional office or directly to us, because there's a tendency to underestimate the importance for history, really, of personal testimonies and records. It doesn't have to be recorded. It maybe someone's passed on, but has left behind some things that they don't know what to do with. It's very rare that Bob and his wonderful staff that are working on this find something they don't want, because this is a human story as well as a national story. And Alaska, as always, played a very creative and important role.
Well, this has been a wonderful walk through Alaska's history. As you know, we're celebrating our 50th anniversary of statehood. Well, statehood is one thing, but when you look at the role that Alaska has played historically over the centuries here, I think it helps to put things in a broader perspective, and knowing what is available through the collection here at the Library of Congress is wonderfully helpful, and knowing that so much of this is now accessible
It's free
to those in Alaska all over the
online.
world. Well, Doctor, thank you so much for joining us here on the Alaska Report, for sharing these treasures with our viewers, giving them a sense of Alaska's place in history, and for ensuring that it is available worldwide to those. But we appreciate all that you do, your leadership here at the Library of Congress.
Well, thank you, and thank you on behalf of all the curators who I know join me in being excited over the possibility of communicating with and being of some assistance to the American people who've made this whole accomplishment and retention of the American memory possible. And thanks to you and the Congress for sustaining it and enabling us to go out and reach even remote regions, which are among our most grateful and most welcome patrons in this whole effort to get free things out to the American people who've made it possible.
Well, Doctor, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for joining us on the Alaska Report.